During one-year tours in Vietnam, over 70% of PBR sailors would be either killed or wounded. They were the most frequently ambushed unit in the entire Vietnam War and had one of the most critical jobs, facing dangers that most soldiers never encountered. Despite their importance, they remained almost completely overlooked for reasons that are hard to understand today. These sailors, known as the river rats, were tasked with patrolling the most hostile waters in the world, facing deadly ambushes, hidden traps, and constant attacks from well-prepared guerrilla forces. Their work was vital for controlling the movement of enemy forces and supplies, yet their sacrifices were rarely recognized outside military circles. When the United States entered the Vietnam War, besides facing dense jungles and expansive rice paddies, they encountered a landscape unlike anything they had seen since the Civil War. The Mekong Delta. This was not just a river or two, it was a vast and complex network of more than 400 miles of natural rivers and approximately 2,400 miles of man-made canals weaving through towns, villages, and farmlands. You might wonder why these canals were constructed and why they were so critical to both the Americans and the North Vietnamese guerrillas. The answer lies in the terrain. Roads were scarce, often unreliable, and in many cases completely impassable, especially during the rainy season when floods could wash out tracks or turn paths into dangerous mud traps. Yet despite these challenges, the Mekong Delta was home to around 8 million people, living in countless towns and villages scattered across the region. For these communities, and for the guerrillas moving through the area, the rivers and canals became the main arteries of transportation, supplying everything from food to weapons and allowing swift movement across the terrain. The Viet Cong recognized this opportunity immediately. They used the waterways to smuggle men, weapons, ammunition, and supplies into South Vietnam, enabling them to exert control over territories far more effectively than on land. The dense mangrove swamps lining these rivers provided perfect cover, making it almost impossible for the deep-draft American warships to navigate. South Vietnam did have small navy boats capable of patrolling shallow waters, but their numbers were limited, and they were often assigned to other duties, leaving smuggling routes largely unchecked. The rivers were perilous for anyone patrolling them, as attacks could come from hidden bunkers, concealed positions on the banks, or even from seemingly empty stretches of water, making every mission a life-or-death gamble. This situation highlighted a serious problem for the Americans. They could not allow the enemy to continue using these waterways to transport vast quantities of weapons and reinforcements. To disrupt the North Vietnamese forces, the Americans had to find a way to control these channels and fast. One incident made this urgency painfully clear: the Von Grobe incident. An American medevac helicopter was flying along the coastline when the pilot noticed something unusual. Hidden under camouflage made of trees and bushes, an old naval vessel was surrounded by activity. Realizing that no friendly vessels were operating in the area, the pilot reported the sighting, which quickly drew the attention of South Vietnamese forces. A-1 Sky Raiders were dispatched to strike the vessel, successfully sinking it. But that was only the beginning. The following day, additional airstrikes were conducted, and Vietnamese commandos landed to investigate the scene. They were immediately met with machine gun fire from hidden concrete bunkers, forcing them to clear the positions with shotguns in brutal close-quarters combat. After intense resistance, they finally uncovered what the guerrillas had been desperately trying to hide. On the sunken ship and spread along the coastline lay approximately 100 tons of Chinese and Soviet-made weaponry, including nearly 4,000 rifles and submachine guns, 500 grenades, and countless mortar rounds and explosives. The scale of the supplies was staggering and underscored just how critical the brown waters of the Mekong Delta were to enemy operations. It became clear that these rivers could no longer be left unchecked, as they were a lifeline for the Viet Cong, capable of shifting the balance of power in the region. However, gaining control of these waterways would not be easy. The enemy had mastered the terrain and was ready to defend it at all costs. Recognizing the need for a specialized force, the United States organized a unique naval unit specifically designed for these conditions. In December 1965, Operation Game Warden was launched, leading to the formation of Task Force 116, which marked the official creation of the U.S. Brown Water Navy. This new force was tasked with patrolling the rivers and canals of the Mekong Delta, confronting guerrillas in their own environment, and cutting off the flow of weapons and supplies that had allowed the enemy to thrive. The river rats, as the sailors came to be called, were equipped with specialized boats designed for shallow waters, armed to the teeth, and trained to face ambushes at every turn. Their missions were dangerous, relentless, and often deadly, but they played a crucial role in turning the tide along the rivers, demonstrating courage and skill in a theater of war that was unlike any other in American military history. Funny enough, this was the first time since the American Civil War that U.S. sailors would routinely operate on rivers, and it represented a completely new kind of naval warfare that required skill, courage, and improvisation. They would work closely alongside their South Vietnamese allies, patrolling the winding rivers and canals of the Mekong Delta, always on the lookout for suspicious activity, hidden enemy positions, or signs of ambushes, a job that quickly proved to be extremely dangerous. The first major challenge was finding a vessel that could handle the unique conditions of the Delta. Muddy, shallow, narrow, and weed-filled waterways that were impossible for traditional naval craft. Conventional boats either ran aground, fouled on vegetation, or were too slow to evade enemy fire. After experimenting with various boats and designs, someone had the idea to try a small 31-foot fiberglass pleasure craft that was being produced by the Unify Company, a civilian design that seemed unlikely for combat but ended up being revolutionary. These boats had a shallow, flat bottom that drew less than a foot of water, allowing them to glide over mudflats, sandbars, and shallow channels where other boats would get stuck. The fiberglass hull was light and flexible, making it easy to maneuver and fast on the water. Although it offered virtually no protection against bullets, shrapnel, or explosives, something crews learned the hard way. What made the boat even more innovative was its propulsion system. Instead of traditional propellers that could easily get tangled in weeds or debris, the boats used twin diesel engines driving water jet pumps that sucked in river water and expelled it at high speed through nozzles, a system known as water jet propulsion. These pumps could move up to 6,000 gallons of water per minute and propelled the 9-ton boat to speeds of around 30 knots, allowing it to skim over soft riverbeds, leap small sandbars, and chase or evade enemies with agility that conventional craft could not match. The boat could even spin within its own length and execute extremely tight turns, which was critical when ambushed from the riverbanks or when trying to slip through narrow channels unseen. This combination of speed, shallow draft, and maneuverability made it the perfect tool for the unique river combat of Vietnam and led to its designation as the PBR, short for Patrol Boat River. Speed was not just an advantage. It was the primary form of protection, because the fiberglass hull and minimal armor could not stop bullets, mortars, or RPGs, and crews quickly learned that any mistake could be fatal. The men who served on these boats became known as river rats, or brown water black berets, nicknames that reflected both the treacherous brown waters they patrolled and the gritty, relentless nature of their work. Each boat had a crew of just 4 men, each with specific and vital roles that required coordination and skill. The boat captain sat at the helm, steering, navigating, and handling radio communications, always needing to keep situational awareness in a hostile environment where one wrong move could be deadly. The forward gunner manned the weapons at the bow, watching for threats and delivering suppressive fire, while the aft gunner doubled as the engineer, maintaining the engines and water jets under fire, sometimes repairing critical components while bullets or shrapnel flew past. The 4th crew member was a versatile utility man who could assist anywhere needed, loading and swapping weapons, helping the captain with radio duties, scanning the shoreline with searchlights, or monitoring the small radar set used for night operations. The boats were mostly fiberglass, which meant bullets would often pass through without slowing, and even RPGs could sometimes pass through the hull without detonating if they hit only soft material. But crews learned to treat every shot as lethal. There was minimal armor around key systems, giving crews only a sense of protection rather than real safety, which meant survival relied on tactical awareness, speed, and firepower. Speaking of firepower, the boats were heavily armed for their size. The forward gunner usually had twin 50-caliber machine guns capable of devastating suppressive fire, while the aft gunner operated another heavy weapon, typically a 50 or 30 caliber machine gun. In addition, there was often an M60 machine gun, and when available, a Mark 18 automatic grenade launcher that could spray explosive rounds at enemy positions hidden in the vegetation. The sailors also carried personal weapons, including M16 rifles, K-79 grenade launchers, shotguns, and sometimes even mortars or light rocket launchers, which could be mounted or fired from the boat or carried ashore during special operations. The exact configuration varied from boat to boat depending on available supplies, but the goal was always the same: be as heavily armed as possible to dominate the river and protect the crew from the many threats lurking along the banks. The Delta itself was a complex and dangerous battlefield, with ambushes waiting around every bend, hidden bunkers camouflaged in dense foliage, and enemy fighters who knew the terrain intimately. The PBR crews had to combine speed, firepower, and constant vigilance to survive, reacting instantly to ambushes while maintaining patrols that kept supply lines under pressure. Every mission was a high-stakes gamble, and the men who served on these boats were tested physically, mentally, and emotionally in ways that few other military units had experienced. They became experts at reading the water and the banks, anticipating enemy movements, and striking quickly when opportunity arose. The Brownwater Navy was not just about the boats. It was about the men who knew how to use them to their fullest potential, turning fragile fiberglass crafts into lethal tools of war and becoming one of the most feared and effective riverine forces in history. So now the task force, 116, was ordered to patrol day and night to seize the Delta's waterways from the Viet Cong and prevent them from supplying weapons. But the Viet Cong, although lacking the speed and heavy armament of the Americans, were masters of the Delta and knew every river, canal, and mangrove bend like the back of their hand. And they weren't afraid to stage daring ambushes to destroy the PBRs that constantly harassed them, making life on the boats unpredictable and dangerous. Either nothing would happen and boredom set in, or chaos could erupt in a matter of seconds, and after a firefight the crews often wished for the dullness of the previous hour. The men worked 12 to 16-hour shifts, and daily life on a PBR was far from comfortable or safe. Imagine being constantly on the water, near an incredibly loud engine whose fumes you inhaled, causing headaches, nausea, and vomiting, while the oppressive heat and humidity gave way to monsoon rains that drenched everything, soaked uniforms, and made the decks slippery. Mosquitoes and the heat were relentless, particularly in the standard helmet, boots, and flat jacket uniform, and your only refuge was your fighting position, with no bunk to sleep on, no toilet to use, and an enemy hidden anywhere along the riverbanks who needed only one well-placed burst or RPG to kill or seriously wound you, making every patrol a life-or-death gamble. So what did a typical patrol look like? During the day, boats generally worked in pairs, with one stopping to inspect sampans and junks, which were often local villagers going about everyday business, carrying goods to sell at markets or transporting supplies, while the second boat watched the coastline and stood ready to unleash heavy firepower if any suspicious activity occurred. Occasionally, they would stop an ordinary-looking boat with what seemed like an innocent villager on board, only to discover weapons, explosives, or other supplies for the Viet Cong hidden inside, or in some cases encounter guerrilla fighters unwilling to surrender, or even boats rigged with booby traps designed to explode the moment they were disturbed. But often, it was ordinary villagers forced to smuggle supplies under threat of violence, with families held hostage if they refused, and women and children were sometimes used as cover, highlighting the brutality of the conflict and the moral complexity faced by the PBR crews. As the line between enemy and civilian was often blurred, the crews would then detain the individual and seize the cargo, effectively stopping tons of war material from reaching the enemy, often firing warning bursts in front of the vessel to compel it to stop, and if it did not comply, they could destroy it, using heavy machine guns or grenade launchers, and many boats and cargo were neutralized this way. However, the bigger danger was often from the shore, where the terrain offered countless natural ambush points, and river rats would attempt to deny these hiding places by burning vegetation with flamethrowers, or even using flaming arrows to expose enemy positions, a strategy as dangerous as it was necessary. Night patrols were especially tense, because between 2,000 and 600 hours, anyone moving along the waterways was presumed hostile, And boat crews had to rely on starlight scopes, primitive radar or flares to identify threats, a mentally exhausting process requiring constant vigilance, rapid decision-making, and immediate action with all weapons at the ready. The Viet Cong often laid mines and booby traps specifically for PBRs, and RPGs or recoilless rifles were frequently hidden along the banks, waiting for unsuspecting crews to pass. During daytime firefights, the boats would maneuver aggressively, unleashing every weapon at their disposal, and UH-1B Hueys, the so-called Seawolf Hueys, were always on standby, armed with machine guns, miniguns, and rocket pods to provide air support or rescue damaged boats. PBRs worked closely with SEAL teams, inserting commandos under cover of darkness to destroy enemy camps, perform reconnaissance, or set ambushes along the rivers, further multiplying their impact. A single PBR unit logged approximately 70,000 patrol hours per month and engaged in roughly 80 firefights, illustrating the extreme intensity of their work. And they faced a monthly casualty rate of about 6%, meaning that the likelihood of completing a year-long tour without injury was extremely low. Despite these dangers, crews took pride in their work and were considered an elite unit. While most engagements were small firefights, several full-scale battles stood out, including the October 31, 1966 engagement, in which two PBRs faced multiple enemy boats and shore positions in what was described as a beehive of enemy activity. Instead of retreating, the boats charged forward, opening fire with everything they had, maneuvering under constant attack to survive and await air support, only to encounter an even stronger enemy force and be forced to attack head-on, laying down suppressive fire and using skillful maneuvers to survive. After about half an hour, the Seawolf Hueys arrived, and, together with the boats, inflicted massive losses on the enemy, sinking around 50 boats and killing over 100 guerrilla fighters in what became the longest naval engagement of the war, lasting well into the night. Boatswain's Mate First Class James E. Williams led the two boats that day, earning the Medal of Honor, Navy Cross, Silver Star, and numerous other awards for his heroism, while Task Force 116 as a whole received a staggering number of decorations, despite operating only about 400 boats throughout the war. Another Medal of Honor was posthumously awarded to Seaman David G. Uli, who, while manning the forward gun of his PBR, observed suspicious activity along the bank, and during a high-speed pass, an enemy grenade landed on the boat. The 22-year-old Ule instinctively jumped from his position, pushed the exposed captain down the hatch, and threw himself over the grenade, absorbing the blast and saving his crewmates at the cost of his own life, exemplifying the unpredictability and danger of every patrol. During the Tet Offensive, PBRs provided mobile fire support and reinforcements, protecting infantry units under heavy assault until larger forces could arrive, playing a critical role in preventing a complete collapse under massive North Vietnamese attacks. By 1970, as part of the Vietnamization policy, Americans gradually turned brownwater operations over to the South Vietnamese, and Task Force 116 was disbanded when Operation Game Warden officially ended. By 1975, the South Vietnamese government collapsed without direct American support, and most of the PBRs left behind were either destroyed or captured by the enemy, leaving a sense that much of the sacrifice had been in vain. PBR crews were largely overshadowed by other events of the Vietnam War and never received the recognition they truly deserved. And this short video is my attempt to correct that and tell the story of these courageous men.